of a slave, crashing it beneath the stars, waiting out a heavy rain, melting down our beating hearts. We could see it to the end. We should do what lovers do. I'll be waiting when the river ends, 'cause tonight you made me feel so good, so good. You know you make me feel so good, so good. Oh, you make me feel so good, so good. You know you make me feel so good, so good. I'm a dedicated, heavy heart. I don't know how to make it through. Shiver since the day we part. I would stop it if I could. I'll survive in Wonderland. I'm hoping you can make it too. I'll meet you where the river ends, 'cause tonight you make me feel so good, so good. You know you make me feel so good, so good. Oh, you make me feel so good, so good. You know you make me feel so good, so good. You know you make me feel so good, so good. You know you make me feel so good, so good. Oh, you make me feel so good, so good. You know you make me feel so good, so good.
Yesterday was overcast, it rained and rained and rained. Funny thing about yesterday, 2 days from now it'll never be the same. I guess that's why they tell us to be thankful for today. And I guess that's what they mean when they say, don't let it get away, get away. Photographs and memories set the tone for what we're supposed to feel. What to do if you never learn? Feelings aren't the only thing that's real. That beat up broken heart of yours might like to see dry eyes today. What good are tears if they only hurt those you love along the way? song just like all the rest. I can't rewrite the history books, but I damn sure do my best. Time goes on like always. One more time, a sad song just like all the rest. I can't rewrite the history books, but I damn sure do my best. Time goes on like always, but it doesn't always take away the pain. I don't know what tomorrow brings, but it sure looks like rain. But it sure looks like rain.
Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Ben from Universal Audio. Welcome back to yet another Office Hours. We're at number 94. We're closing in on 100. If you guys were here last week, we celebrated just over a year of hanging out together, and we're gonna keep on hanging out together, guys. This is always a lot of fun. A lot of familiar names and faces already here in the chat. See some folks that have been releasing projects 100% done in Luna, and also folks interested about the photos and the opening countdown. So if you guys don't already know, make sure hit us up. It's live@uaudio.com. That's where you can send all your music, and just let us know a little bit about how Luna or Apollo or UAD were a part of making the music. And then for all the photos, it's super easy. Just hashtag Universal Audio on Instagram or Facebook, and the team will find those and select the best ones. And you never know, you might end up in a countdown. We got a really fun show for you guys today. We're going to be talking about mixdowns, exporting audio. We've seen a few questions about this in the chat, and of course across the internet. People curious about how to export audio, how to get projects out of your Luna session, whether you're going to be bouncing them out to send to clients or exporting to be able to manipulate in other software. We're going to do a nice little deep dive on all the different ways that you can mix and export audio. But luckily, I don't have to do it all myself because I got a couple of friends here with me. We got Drew and Matt with us today. How you guys doing?
Good. How you doing, man?
Good. How you doing? Good to see you guys.
Good to see you guys too. Oh man, this is gonna be kind of a fun one. This is like one of the often overlooked parts of the process, right? It's making music's really fun, recording it's cool, mixing it's awesome. And then the nitty gritty here is like, all right, now how do you share this with other humans? And there's some, it's not a terribly difficult process, but there's some nuance to it. And then there's a lot of cool features that some of you guys may not know Luna could do, specifically when it comes to mixing down and exporting out of your Luna sessions. So today, I think we're gonna kind of go over the entire mix down export workflow and all the different tricks and tips that we can get along the way. And then we'll also do, due to popular response based on last week's SSL channel walkthrough, we're going to continue diving down the channel strip rabbit hole, and we'll talk about the Neve 88RS today as well. I saw we're getting lots of requests for us to cover different plugins. Unfortunately, we can only do one a week, so it's going to take us a while to get through them all. But we're gonna go thoughtfully and carefully down the list, starting with all the different channel strips, because they're some of the most useful ones. They have the most, they've got EQ, compression, filters. They got kind of everything you need in one plugin. So they're a lot of fun to use, and they're very powerful. And they're a good deal. They're good value, right? Like the amount of processing power you get from each of these channel strips is immense.
Yeah, we're going for quality over quantity, and yeah, like Ben said, they have a lot in them. So like even from just an instance count, like if you have one in the unison slot, it's like you're getting a lot of bang for your buck in that slot. And then if you have in record effect slots, they're really taking up what would be 2 slots. You can get 2 for 1 there with just your slot count.
Absolutely. So yeah, a lot of people already seeing some good questions around exports, real time versus offline, wondering what's going on there, when to choose one over the other. We're going to be talking about that. Folks are asking, Drew, what's the news on Mac Mini M1 support?
Yeah, if you Google UAD M1, your first hit is going to be a help.uaudio.com document that will get you up and running right now for UAD. Our full qualification process is still ongoing. There's a lot of parts, so there's a lot of moving parts, console and the entire plugin library. So there's a lot of stuff that we're still in the process of qualifying. But we're seeing lots of success, almost 100% success for people that are using that workaround. So if you find that, then you should get up and running pretty quickly with UAD. Luna, on the other hand, Luna is running great on M1s. There are some specific bugs primarily focused around the instruments. But other than that, it's going good too. So, we're working hard on all of that, and we'll make a big stink about it when it is time. So don't worry, you'll hear about it.
Yep.
When it's officially qualified,
Yeah, our QA team is vigorously testing all this stuff. And this is the big thing that hopefully people are getting the point across here is like, the amount of testing that goes in before we fully support something, especially is going from Intel to M1. It's a very foundational change here, guys. So it doesn't happen instantly. And we also, when we do it, we don't want to have to immediately update again because there was some sort of bug that went unfound. So just know that the team here, especially the QA and engineering team, they're working super hard to get that that support for you guys. But yeah, in the interim, both Drew and I can confirm that it does work. The workaround works well. And then there's just a few things you got to keep an eye out for. But again, this is all detailed on that knowledge base article. So be sure to check that out. Cool. And then, yeah, if you guys have got questions as we're going through the show today, hit us up in the live chat. We'll keep an eye on there. And I guess without further, let's start diving into some mixdown talk here. So I guess Drew, should we kind of be looking at a screen, I guess, while we're talking through this? Because there's kind of like there's like a normal, there's kind of like a straight ahead normal mixdown workflow, and then we'll show some of the complicated added bonus things that you can do with it as well. So yeah, walk us through this. What's the process look like for you?
So yeah, let's start with the most obvious example where let's say you're either in progress with a mix or maybe you're finished a mix and it's time to create the final output. Or like I said, if you're midway through a mix, maybe you're just going, want to send it to a friend or you want to send it to your mastering engineer to get to get a mix consultation or what have you. And so, I'm big on the keyboard shortcut Option Command B, which is, where is that? That's up in the file, right? Export and Mixdown. So you've got a couple of choices here. You can do it via the menu, the export menu, or there's your command Option Command B, and you're going to bring up the Mixdown pane. And this area here has a couple of different pages. So we want to make sure we go through this pretty good because you may, hopefully everybody's been using or aware that there's a secondary page to this, right? So up here at the top, we start with sources. Mm-hmm. And by default, your main output is always selected every time you do a mixdown, right? Because, the Luna thinks, well, chances are you're doing a mixdown. The main thing you're going to want to do is the main output. So this is your finished 2-track master. If your project is going to be sent off to mastering, you're probably going to want to turn off your limiter, bypass your limiter and bounce the main without a peak limiter on it. So the mastering engineer has the headroom they need to do their thing. Mm-hmm. If you're bouncing a ref or if you're bouncing a something for a friend, or maybe you're self-mastering, if you're trying to do that thing, you could go ahead and leave that on, and then you're generating your final output.
Yeah. So this is all. So basically, what you're saying is and in Luna, as you guys will remember, like there's a main bus fader when we did the buses and aux episode. So that main fader, that's a very special fader. It's tied to your monitor left and right. So it's what finally goes out of your speakers. And then as Drew showed in the export, the mixdown window, that's automatically selected. It's always, Luna's kind of assuming, all right, hey, that fader, that's probably what you want to send people. You want to send what you've been hearing. So it's going to select that by default, and it will obviously export with all the processing that you have on there. So yeah, Drew, that's a good reminder that if you're sending it off to be mastered, do your mastering engineer a solid and either remove the peak limiter. But a lot of times what I like to do is instead of removing the peak limiter, I just make it so it's doing no work, but still giving me the peak protection, so like,
right. Sure.
Hopefully I've gained stage well enough that, by pulling it down the peak limiter 6 dB, there's no longer any peak limiting happening, but you definitely don't want to send your mastering engineer clipped files.
Yeah, if you and really it's probably if you turn off your peak limiter and your stereo bus is crushed, then you probably have some gain staging work to do upstream a little bit. Right. So take that as a learning lesson, I guess.
Totally, right?
Yeah.
Nice. So that's the and then what, you could just hit mixdown, right? Or do you have to?
Yeah. Well, and before you do that, let's talk about. Well, we have a couple of options here that don't really apply to this specific workflow. We'll get to these: the MIDI file, bypass effects, etc. Let's skip down to them because in this scenario, all you're really doing is bouncing your main output. And the only other options that you're concerned with for this workflow is where, right? Luckily, Luna now has builds a dedicated export folder for each session, which is super cool, and it auto selects it. So if you just wanted to go to the default exported files folder, then you don't have to do anything. It's going to do that by default.
And it does it inside your session folder, so that way it's all contained. Your session is right next to your bounces, all in one place.
Yeah, so if I click on this, it'll bring up the Finder dialog box, and if I go Command up arrow, I'll go up one level, and you can see that this band is called Circuit Villains. This song's called Bad Sugar, and there's the session, which is the packet is grayed out because there's not really anything to do with that. And then there's my exported files. So nice. That's where it'll put those. So and then underneath of that, you have your audio file settings, which by default are 24, 44.1 wave. And of course, you can change them. You can export as AIF, AAC, or MP3, whichever you like. Be mindful though that for anything that's production worthy or anything, if you're sharing files with somebody, if you're exporting a file that someone's going to track on top of, definitely stick with the full res wave or AIF as the formats. AAC and MP3, they're fine for getting somebody a rough mix or something, but you don't want to involve them in the production process.
They're not essentially the thing to note. Yeah, they're lossy files. Who wants lossy files? But But
Yeah.
obviously the compression, it's nice for being able to email someone a file. But what Drew's pointing out here is that sometimes they will not be sample accurate anymore. So where year 0 is and where the person who drops an MP3 into their session file, they may be not sure if it's a consistent amount, but everyone's always reported that, hey, there's like a little extra silence or a little they just don't quite line up perfectly like you did intend. And that's just a function of the lossy files versus the lossless files.
Yeah, for sure. So just definitely stick with those full res formats for anything that's production in nature at all. Sample rate, of course, we have the whole gamut here. Luna is sample rate agnostic, so you can basically work at any sample rate at any time you want. But this is where you would determine the actual sample rate of the outputted file. So you could be working at 96 and want to send somebody a 48K file or something.
And vice versa,
of course,
too, right? Like you could be working at 48, and then, especially if if you track your original files in, the beauty of the way sample rates are handled in Luna, you can record at 96, mix and work at 44, 48 as you're doing it, and then upsample again on the export. Just know that that's for sure. We're gonna talk about CPU usage and the offline versus real time bouncing here in a minute, but just be aware that that's going to basically be over doubling the amount of work that your computer is going to do for those high sample rate bounces. So that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, so and this is I believe it remembers your last export because mine always says 48 by default.
Oh, really? Okay, cool. Yeah. So that's something I just assumed it was 44.1. But yeah, if it remembers your last one, all the better.
Yeah.
So that's the basics. That's the basics of your initial mixdown, the initial, getting something out of here using with just the main output. And, obviously, as you can see in that sources pane, there's a lot more to it. So I don't know if you want me to keep going, Ben. You want to take this next segment?
Just last thing I wanted to note that you can do in here. I remember you couldn't do in the very, very first versions of Luna, but you can do nowadays is you can rename the files before they bounce.
Yeah, sure.
So just by double clicking on the names down there, if you're like me, I like to increment my mixes. And an especially cool thing is when we added session versions to Luna.
Yeah.
If you're constantly, if you're making yourself new versions, Luna will automatically add those version names to your mixdown name. Which I really, really like. So yeah, as soon as you've incremented your version, it'll say a song name, the session name, version name, and then what output it's tagged to. Which all this comes in real handy with the next thing that Drew's about to show us, which is how you can do not just your main output, but you can also you can basically export stems out of Luna as well as individual tracks. So
yeah,
and it's so simple. I love this workflow.
Yeah. So this is where Luna gets really powerful for such a young app to have such an advanced feature. I mean, other apps it took many years to get this kind of functionality. But so as you'll notice here that when I go to that back to the sources area of my mixdown pane, in addition to the main, I also have these other track types: buses, tracks, and outputs. If I hold down Option, I can expand and contract all of those, track types. So if I just want to look at my buses, I can look at buses. If I just want to look at tracks, I can look at tracks. And Option will do them all, of course. And then, so the idea here is that in addition to or simultaneous to making your main output at those sample rate and bit depth that you've chosen in the previous window, I can actually choose to do my buses. Now, in this particular session, I really only have one true subgroup, right? My drum subgroup. I don't have everything else subgrouped out just because this is a simple song. But imagine if you had, drums, a drum subgroup that would create a drum stem, and you had a percussion subgroup that would create a percussion stem, and bass and guitar and vocals and background vocals. If you had all of that neatly structured, right? If you go back a couple of episodes when we talked about the bus show, right? Maybe 2-3 weeks ago, you'll notice that typically when I'm doing a full mix, I have everything very neatly segmented and separated such that all of the tracks, including their effects, go to dedicated subgroups. And when you do that, you actually put yourself into a position where with the click of one button, i.e. clicking this buses master bus tab, I can generate stems of my entire project: drums, bass, vocals, guitars, all of that. So that's really awesome to be able to do the main mix and the stems. And then underneath of it, if I want, I can also output all of the individual tracks. So I literally can make a main 2-track bounce, stems, and a full multi-track bounce of all of my tracks, all in one shot, which is amazing. You also can do outputs too, which I don't do outputs very often. I guess that would come up maybe in a summing scenario. You might use that.
If you're doing analog, if you're sending multiple hardware outs, you'd be able to capture what's being fed out to those. Which, if you're doing analog, it might be kind of nice to have what you're sending, but then obviously you're kind of missing the any sort of out of the box processing that you're doing. But
so that's super powerful. I mean, and very advanced, you know.
So this applies, not just for mixing engineers who are trying to send out stems, but most importantly for producers or engineers. If you're trying to, you want to share your production with a co-producer to have them, continue to work on a track or chop up your guitar, like doesn't matter. The fact that you can quickly select, I'm gonna send them all my guitar tracks. Just select the guitar tracks. And often what I'll do is I'll include the main. This is a little tip for anyone that's sending stems around. It never hurts to send someone the main mix as well. So that way they know, hey, here's where the bar 1 is, and then I see the guitar start here in the second verse. So kind of including the kind of the reference where everything's supposed to lay is always super helpful when you're sharing files with other folks. But there's also a couple other options in the Mixdown menu that help with sharing, especially with production in mind. So one of the other key things.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry, Ben. Go ahead.
I was going to talk about the tempo thing. But is there
cool. Yeah. Well, before we leave this window, just to reiterate what Ben said, like if you're making beats and if you're gonna sell them tracked out, like, or as opposed to the 2-track, right? This is a great example of where you can do both in one fell swoop. You can get everything you need right there. All right, so let's say we've picked all of our tracks. We're whatever we want to do here. If we want to do all the tracks, we want to do all the buses. I'm going to hit done, and that takes me back to the main Mixdown page. And of course, you'll see that down here, I've populated the output, right? So now you've seen, because I've selected main, I've selected buses, I've selected tracks. Luna's going to output a lot of files here, all of which you can go in and number, and you can see how they take on the name of the session version as well as the track or the bus. And then so go ahead, Ben. We'll pick up from here on now, because now these things start to come into play, right?
Exactly. As soon as you start doing tracks like this is where the options really come in handy. So the first one is include MIDI file for tempo map and instruments. This one's great because it shares all of the MIDI inside of your session in a single file. So this way, if you've got a piano, like the rough piano part or the drum pattern, but most importantly, the tempo. Now, if you're sending off to a session musician to do some bass for you or something like that, they can now bring in, the main 2-track mix, maybe the bass stem that you separate out so they can learn the part. But then it can also bring in this MIDI track, which would then tell them, here's the tempo of the song. Oh yeah, here's the piano track, so you could just quickly read the changes. I found so many uses for sending people this. And it's such a lightweight file. Like, MIDI files are a couple kilobytes usually.
And if you're going into Pro Tools, you'll get your markers as well. Going into Pro Tools, your Luna markers will get into Pro Tools. It doesn't work for Logic. I guess it handles markers differently, but Pro Tools will read Luna's markers from that MIDI file.
Hell yeah. And then the other one's bypass effects. Especially if you're going to be sending off tracks to be mixed, if you want to include a dry version of your track. So this would bypass all of the inserts on your track. And correct me if I'm wrong, Drew, does this also bypass the tape slot on a track?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it does. Matt, do you know that one for sure? I would imagine it does, but I actually haven't tested it myself.
To a chat question. What was the question?
Does the bypass effects button include tape?
I don't believe so, but I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, that'd be something good to test out, which is an easy thing to test.
Yeah. So, but the bypass effect, and this is always a creative decision. Like a lot of mixing engineers appreciate the head start, especially if you've done some processing that you love, right? Like if you've got an amp sim on a track that you're like, that's my tone, like start there. then you wouldn't, you'd want to be able to you'd want to export a version with that option not checked. But something like lead vocals or drums, like if you've gone in and you think you got it, but you're unsure about your decisions, you can hit bypass effects, automatically bypasses that. And in some cases, what I've had clients do is I've had them send me both. Obviously you're doing two processes here, so you do one pass of sending all the stems with their effects on, and then one pass with them all bypass. But it then gives your mixing engineer or your co-producer, gives them the option to, oh, actually, I want the acoustic drums, just raw as they were, so I can do my own thing. But I need that guitar amp simulator that you had on the guitar tracks, so they can kind of pick and choose. And as long as you do this in a consistent way, everything's going to line up perfectly. And that kind of leads into the next one, which is the preserve mono tracks. So what does that one do, Drew?
Yeah, so this one it's slightly cryptically labeled in the sense that it really determines the pickoff point of the file that you're going to generate. So for example, if you have, let's say you have a track that is a mono track, but it's obviously feeding the main output, which is stereo. If you do not check this box and you have it selected over here, then Luna will create a stereo file from that mono track, which most of the time, unless you're wanting the processing that's through it, that it's going through, or you want it to maintain, you want that pan information to be baked in, because this is really about level and about pan. If you want them baked in, then you can leave that unchecked. But me personally, I'll most often check it, because what it's really going to do is it allows you to include the tape and all of your insert effects, but the pickoff point for the bounce will be pre-fader, and therefore your fader level and pan and automation won't be a part of it. So basically, if you want to include automation, uncheck this box. If you want to have the pickoff point be pre-fader or pre-automation and just get sort of the track at unity gain, then you want to do that. It also has the added benefit, like I said, of keeping mono tracks mono and stereo tracks stereo. So lots of options. You just want to make sure you educate yourself and watch videos like this in order to figure out exactly what these things are doing. But yeah, that's kind of the thing there. It's about where the signal gets picked off from.
And you literally answered a chat question with that, Drew. I saw someone asking if it would include automation and volume levels. And so yeah, that's the preserve mono track. So you get two benefits. You get the mono, if you got a mono bass track, you get to preserve it as a mono, but it also will ignore that automation. But if you do want to commit the automation, both the panning and the fader levels, as well as everything else, leave that unchecked.
And you'll get all stereo tracks, because they all will have been, unless it's being fed to a mono bus, which most things aren't going to be. Most things will be fed to that main out, and so you'll get a bunch of stereo files. Which is, if that's what you want, then by all means.
Mm-hmm. Well, and now, so the last option is definitely the one I've seen the most in the chat. People wondering about real-time mixdown. So everyone's curious, why is it sometimes that offline bouncing takes longer than real-time bouncing? So yeah, there's a bunch of tips that we can kind of give you guys around that. And I know some people have even said, man, on simple sessions, it feels like the offline bounce takes forever. But there's actually, there's some things that kind of really seem to impact the mixdown time more than others. So yeah, Drew, do you kind of have some heads up on tips to speed that up?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, the things that I see on the day-to-day basis are, generally speaking, what this is about is the CPU, because and the number of native, the number of extensions and native processes that you have going. So, for example, the ATR. The ATR is a native extension. Your CPU is processing that in real time. It's not on your UAD DSP. And the ATR it's a beefy algo. There's a lot to it. So the times I see people having issues is maybe I've seen sessions where there's 6 or 7 or 8 of these things, of the ATRs in there. So you definitely want to watch your native CPU, your native processing usage on the extension side, Studer and ATR. The summing are not terribly, they're not as CPU extensive or consuming as the tape ones are. And then also on the flip side of that, I've also seen instances where it can be based on the amount of DSP you're using. If you have a very large system with a lot of chips in it, when you go to process or when you go to mix down, if you have a lot of DSP plugins in place, that's just a lot of background stuff that's going on that Luna's having to manage. So, I mean, the bottom line is no one should ever be sitting through a bounce that's longer than the length of the song. If you're finding that, then by all means, I mean, check the button, right? Check the button, and you'll never wait longer than the length of the song, right? So please just number one, do that.
Just
right?
like that's the quickest solution to this. And you know, guys, you're not alone. Like all of us have run into the same issue. Big, heavy sessions. You go to mix them down, and you try to do it offline. And you're like, that progress bar is moving awfully slow. Hit cancel, come back in here, press real-time mix down, listen, enjoy your progress one more time. And you know, it's kind of, I personally like to listen a lot, like even if it wasn't a slowdown thing. But so yeah, CPU, Drew mentioned CPU matters a lot, and even the type of CPU that you have, right? Like we've had a few people who've worked with support. Turns out they were working on like an i3 machine. It's gonna struggle hard, and in which case, again, if you're able to get the playback happening with real time mixdown, just use that. It'll run faster. Lots of processing, the memory and disk type. Like there's so many different factors that it's hard to say for certain what causes a certain person's slowdown. It could be a specific AU plugin that is trying to crazy oversample as it's going in that offline bounce mode. So just end of the day, cancel and go real time if it's a real big issue. And do know the other thing, keep your Luna up to date. If you haven't done the latest update, always be updating that. The devs are working super hard behind the scenes optimizing all this stuff. And I can confirm, like I've had sessions that in December were taking forever that now are bouncing faster than real time. So it's getting better and better each time.
Make sure your AUs are always up to date too. Yeah, definitely make sure they're up to date. Mm-hmm. So that one, the bottom line is this: don't ever wait longer than the length of the song, right? That's simple as make sure you're doing that. So yeah, I guess, and the only other thing I think the one thing we didn't mention was the idea of the bounce length, right? One of the things. Yeah,
someone just asked this in the chat. They're like, "Why? How come sometimes when mixdowns have tons of extra info at the end?" And that could be, there could be like a little snippet of audio way off on the side of your timeline or automation. There could be something down there. So what Drew's about to show you guys, this is the number one tip, just for consistency's sake, a really quick and easy way to make sure your bounces are consistent.
Yeah, I always have a marker that's the top and then the end or whatever, and you want to make sure that your end marker is far enough off that would incorporate any reverb tails that you might have or delay repeats. Definitely, test it out. Make sure that that is far enough at the end. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to do Control, Option, and the comma, right? Quotes and L. This is the keyboard shortcut: Control, Option, and then L and apostrophe. Sorry, that keyboard shortcut is how you navigate through your markers. So one of the things that I like to do before I bounce is I'll go to my first marker, and then I'll hold down Shift and go to my next marker, and it will select the perfect amount of space. And now this way your bounce will be just what is selected. So if you always have and if I have other markers in here, maybe I have other ones here. All I have to do is, go to the beginning marker, add Shift, and then throw it, hit the apostrophe until I get to my end marker. I've got the perfect consistent selection that will always output that file the same amount. So
yeah,
make sure you're doing that.
Make sure you're doing that. One thing that I've messed up before, and it's a good thing to know, is that if you're just being lazy, if you're like, I don't want to select, you know what, just Luna, you take care of it, bounce it. It'll bounce from where your playhead starts to the end that it thinks.
Oh yeah.
So yeah. I've gotten caught out a couple times where I'm just about to send a mix off to a client, and I'd QC guys, this is, never embarrass yourselves. Just always check your files before you send them off to folks. You play it and you're like, wait, that's the first chorus. What happened to? I had my playhead on the first chorus. So where you place your playhead does matter for doing these exports, which is why Drew's tip here of it's so easy to add a marker, even if you're not starting on bar one, just adding that top marker so you can consistently get back to here's where my bounces will always start. Having that in place in your session is a huge advantage. And then, the little trick of adding a end marker makes it so you can have a consistent range. So each mix revision lines up perfectly with each other.
Well, yeah, Ben, you just made a great point there, the whole QC thing. So even if Luno could bounce a mix off in 5 seconds, no matter what was going on with it, you should be listening to it in real time, start to finish anyway. Especially if you're sending a final master to the mastering engineer, or you're about to upload a file to SoundCloud or Spotify, whatever you're going to release it. would you ever, you wouldn't think you'd want to release a song without listening to it. One more last final listen, certainly worth it, right?
You would be surprised how people are in a hurry these days, man. They got a lot to do. You're right. Like it's this is, and I've seen, a few people have pointed this out in comments before where they're like, dude, I'm mixing say like a TV show. It's 46 minutes. And like I've been listening to it over and over. I don't want to listen to 46 minutes.
Yeah, I hear you on that. Yep, for sure.
Right? So when those long ones, totally understandable. But again, if you're finding that it's taking too long, hit real time, go out, get a snack, have some lunch, throw on YouTube. Come watch Office Hours again or something. You got time. You got some time to kill. Make the best of it. But I'm seeing a few people kind of in here asking some questions, especially around like solos and mutes and effects and stuff like that. So let's make sure we get this super clear. So when you guys are, especially when you're using that main, just the normal mixdown workflow, and even I believe in the subtrack ones as well, if something is muted in your session, it's muted on your export. I think even include Matt, you know this, right? For the track, if you were to export a track and you had the track muted inside of your Luna session, you would get a silent file, correct?
Unless you have preserve mono tracks checked, then it'll bounce pre-mute and you will get the track.
Yep. So otherwise
solos,
you're getting whatever you hear, right?
Yeah, and exactly. Solos, if you're in the standard solo mode where destructive solo, it will. And by destructive, I mean it mutes all the other channels, and you bounce out your main output. Yeah, you'll get just the soloed file because that's all that's coming out of the main output in that moment.
Yep. Yeah. So solos, mutes, automation, all these work unless you there's one option to turn those things off, which is the preserve mono tracks, and then obviously you can combine that with bypass effects if you want the fully raw audio track to be sent out.
Yeah.
And just to circle back on the bypass effects question, I just tested it in the background here. Bypass effects does bypass tape, so something to be aware of there.
Nice.
Awesome.
Look at this real time experiments happening. I love it.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you very much, Matt.
Yeah, trying to get you guys the truth here as much as we can. So yeah, catching up here on questions. We need keyboard shortcuts for Azerty. For different keyboard layouts. Yeah, hit us up in the feedback. I know early on they were making some adjustments to keyboard shortcuts for non-QWERTY keyboards for folks that are on Azerty or other ones.
Right.
I'm not super clear of what their solutions were, or if it's keeping the same area in different key names, or if it's the same key names in different locations. Yeah, we'll circle back on that one.
Get a ticket open with support on that one. I would recommend getting a ticket open with support so that they know if you're seeing an issue, then they're going to want to know about it. So that's what I would recommend that for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so no, you're correct. By not bypassing effects in the print, it will include all the inserts and tape. Everything that was being fed into the mixer is getting included. And I saw someone was asking a little bit earlier about if you wanted to capture audio, if you wanted to capture your mixdown inside of your session, is there a way to do that? And the answer is absolutely yes. You can totally. Some people prefer this workflow of kind of, instead of bouncing off and just having dump into a folder, being able to preserve all the different mix revisions or production revisions inside the session. You can totally do this. And Drew, it looks like you've got a track down below your main fader right now. Is that kind of set up to be able to do this capture inside the session trick?
Well, it's funny. Actually, I'm not. So you might want to show the actual capture thing, but what I typically do is I just do I do the regular bounce and then I just drag it back in.
Okay.
So I love the idea of the mixes being preserved in the package, but I'm not set up to do that specific, what you're talking about. So maybe you want to demo that. But before we do that, Bo was asking about the preserved mono. Does it have the same effect on stereo tracks that they not come out in mono? Stereo tracks will always be stereo. The preserve mono button on a stereo track we'll pick it off pre-fader, so it won't have any of your level or automation or the mutes in it. But it'll still always be stereo. It won't ever mess around with the stereo-ness of your track. So just answering that question real quick.
Nice. I see Jamie's noticed that the Rival Sons are out using Luna right now. We Drew, you just posted that to the social team today as well. Yeah. Rival Sons, they're good friends of here. If you guys may remember, right at the launch of Luna, we had Vance Powell and Dave Cobb on. where we were looking at a rival Suns track that Vance brought into Luna. So yeah, they've been Luna friends from the get go. So it's really really cool to see them out there working with it. So yeah, let's talk about kind of bouncing back into your session. I'll share my screen here. So something that this is, think about why you'd want to do this. This is a great way to be able, like Drew said, be able to keep all of your sessions, keep all your mixes inside of your session, and be able to. This is only going to work for kind of a real time mixdown workflow. And there's a couple of considerations to also add to this, but let me show you guys how to set this up. So I've got my main fader here. I've got a mixdown audio track, a stereo audio track that I just created. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up here to my input, and on the left-hand side here, over in my list of available inputs, I'm going to select a monitor left-right. So this is now, as many of you know, your Apollo allows you to use your monitor output as an input. We've shown the tricks using this for like loopback or audio hijack in the past, and it's a quick way to be able to do that. Looks like I am covering up that part. Let me just scroll this over. There you go. Now you guys can see. Now my input is a monitor left right. Number one thing before you guys click any other buttons, do this for your own safety and security. Before you click anything else, come down here. Zoom out. There you go. And come down to here. Hit the mute button. All right, guys. This could create a super nasty feedback loop that will drive you and your Apollo. It'll make everybody unhappy.
Ruin marriages.
It ruins lives. And honestly, for safety, a lot of times what I do is I come down and I pull the fader down to 0, because every once in a while I'll option click the mute button to unmute all my tracks, and then you're in for a bad time. So mute, pull your volume fader down. This is simply here. This is kind of like an archival track in a way. So what I'm going to do is now I can record enable or input. This basically just sits here inactive until I'm ready to mix or bounce down my song. Then all I have to do is put that in record ready and hit record. Or I don't really need a 4-bar countdown. There we go.
Although ironically,
right. So now,
ironically, it's a good way to record the click, right?
It is, isn't it?
Yeah.
So now you guys are hearing the beautiful Lewis song. And what you guys were hearing as well was getting captured in real time down to here. And this is post all of the processing. So it's whatever was going out to my speakers is now captured as stereo audio here inside my session. So step 2, step 3, whatever step we're on right now for this, is getting that audio out. So, if I were to come over and do what we were showing you guys before and do the mix down, this is overkill. I've already captured my final mix. I've captured everything I need to capture. So you don't need to use the mix down window anymore. You're going to use a different shortcut. And I think it's here in the menu as well. So go File, Export, and you do clips right here. Because now I've captured my mix as a clip inside of my timeline. So I can go Command-Shift-K. It's a similar looking window, but slightly different. This is just for exporting. And by the way, guys, this trick works as well for individual files. So, as much as we've been talking about using the mixdown window to bounce out your individual track files, you can do, whoops, my bad, guys. Let me bring this over so my face is not covering it up.
There you go.
There we go. So it's very similar. A lot of the same options and same defaults here. So you can see it's gonna export it to the same folder that your mixdown would be exported to. You have control over the file type, the sample rate, the bit depth, and of course you can select multiple files doing this too. You see, as I'm selecting files inside my timeline, it's adding them to this export list. This is another really powerful way to export stems or multiple audio tracks to send off to somebody. The thing you gotta notice is you can probably barely see this here, but you see the orange outlines. It is just exporting this clip. So if it's not on the bar or if it's not from the beginning of the session, it's gonna be awfully hard to line up again. So this is where we'll walk you guys through a bit of a consolidation workflow that you can use for this. But again, for this example, the main thing we wanted to get out of here was, oops, let me zoom everything back out, and E, there we go. So this is the one I really wanted to send. So now I can hit export, this is the fastest. As long as it's not doing a lot of thinking about the sample rate conversion, this is going to be the fastest way to get audio files out of a Luna session. So is this all making sense for you guys? For anyone that's wanting to do this sort of workflow where you're bouncing inside of your session and then just exporting that. Hopefully this is all making sense. Any questions as I'm going through that, Drew?
I don't think so. No, I think
nothing coming up.
Yeah.
Nice.
If anybody's nervous about this or feels like this is more steps, just doing the regular mix down and dragging the file back in. If your sole purpose is to just maintain the mixes with the package, then that works great. What Ben is showing you has the benefit of being in sync with your printed mix, and it becomes A-B-able, right? It becomes A-B-able with a little trick that we've shown a couple times on the stream. So Ben, if you want to switch over to your mix window, like let's say you wanted to monitor back those mixes, you could send this mix. If you sent it out of a queue, right? If you set that queue to Unity gain and make it pre-fader, especially if you have the fader down. Well, queues are pre-fader anyway, so and then just set that to Unity gain, and then in your control room, in your source rather, you could toggle back and forth between the queue and the monitor, which would allow you to listen to that mix, right? And A/B it against your current mix. So the workflow that Ben just showed you is a really great way of being able to have a one happening and toggle between monitor source and Q1. You'd want to be in the control room thing, Ben.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's how you do it for your headphones.
This is how you do it for headphones. And
for the headphones, yeah.
And then you could split this to Drew. Your trick there is the mirror that Q2 to align output. So then on my, if I was using an external monitor controller, I could go between, mon left right and line 3-4 or back and forth.
Or if you're in your control room monitors, then you'd want to do it in the source of the control room pane.
Yep, which is this one here.
Right there.
The one that you were begging me to open.
Yep, that was the one I was begging you to open. That's what
Yeah, so this one, you notice it gave me a bug here because it's currently not enabled as a source because I was dedicating it to the mix. So I turned that off, and then now I'm going between when I'm going monitor here, I'm listening to the main out, and then when I go to Q2, I'm now listening to the only track that's feeding into Q2, which is this bounce track. So it's a great, we've shown this trick a couple times, but it is such a cool trick to be able to quickly go back and forth between, your rough mix and your finished mix to see if make sure you're improving your mix. Or you can also drop in reference mixes here, and again, use this little trick of between your source and a queue to be able to do A/B with a commercial mix as well. It's a really fun trick. And then I hinted at this was what we just kind of talked about here is another way to consolidate and send stems out of a session. So something like this is the Fab Everyman session, Luna session that you guys can go download inside the app right now. So all these string files, for instance, say I need to send these back to Fab for him to import to a session. You can see that they're all rendered from 0 already. So they're at the start of my session. They're already consolidated. They're single wave files. I can just simply hit Command-Shift-K, and by selecting those clips or selecting around those clips so they were encapsulated, you can see I can now export all of those string and horn tracks just by Command-Shift-K. And again, this will be blazingly fast.
When you do it that way, it's pre-tape, pre-inserts, pre-fader, pre-everything.
Yeah, so you're able to send them just the raw audio files. There it is. See, I promised it was going to be fast. It sat there thinking about it for a second, and now it's just boom, all exported, all in this one place. Key thing though is those ones were already consolidated. That was easy. Let me show you guys the workflow for tracks that have some audio edits to it. And obviously, note as I'm expanding these tracks here, you notice there's a couple of instrument tracks. None of these tricks work for instrument tracks. You're going to have to use the Mixdown workflow if you wanted to export these two instrument tracks as audio. You're going to want to use the Option Command B Mixdown setting. Come in here, select those two tracks to mix down, and then that will export your instrument tracks as audio files. But for all of these ones, these are all audio files. Fab's made a couple little tiny nudge edits around on them. But now I want to send this, say I want to bring this over into Ableton or a different DAW or send it off to a friend to remix or something like that. This is my suggestion. I'm going to add a couple of slightly unnecessary steps, but to me they're very necessary, because what happens if like one of these edits isn't perfect? A few of the steps we're going to do here about the consolidation process, they're difficult to go back from. Obviously, you can do undo, but what I really recommend you guys do is save some versions here. So there's two places you can save the versions. One is to do a version on the track. So clicking this button here, it now exposes all my version lists. And since I'm in selection grouping mode, all these tracks that I have selected, if I hit this button here, which is duplicate version, it's going to make a new version for each one of them. And what I really kind of like how Luna automatically names these, notice that a few of them jumped from like V6 up to V12. That's because, this one acoustic guitar track had a V11. So Luna bumps them up, and especially since I did these all together, I now have a version saved in here that's, well above where the other ones were, but it's really plain and obvious to see. And in fact, I can even come in here and rename this version on one track. I usually just do console, because I can't spell the whole word. And now you notice that version is renamed on all those tracks that I had selected. So I now have a console version inside the track. So that's one place to save your butt down the line. The other one I also really like to do is I come in here and I do save new version. Don't worry about those changes. Consolidate and send. I'll make myself a version.
You can spell it.
I know. I kid. But I do spell in all caps, and I'm just joking. Big note to myself. It's a big, loud yell back at myself. So this is consolidate and send. This is a new version. I love the mix. I don't want to mess this up. I don't want to lose my edits. I just want to be able to consolidate these files to send them off to a friend. Make yourself a new version, whether it's on the track level. You could also just do it here on the session level. This ensures that you can get back to what you liked. Hit save. All right, my butt is covered. I can get back to what I had. So far we've just been covering our butts to be able to get back to the unedited versions. But it gets really fast from here on out, because there's a couple of keyboard shortcuts that are going to rapidly accelerate this process I'm walking you guys through. Option Shift 3. Boom. Edit's gone. Mutes, fades, edit points, everything. However it was is how they now are, but as just single individual audio files.
Well, and and be sure that before you do that one, Ben, that if you think there's any question about those edits, about those said crossfades, like make sure that you've gone in and check them.
Yeah, right? Either go in and check, or yet again, if you want to be lazy and you're not in a QC sort of mode, if you hit Command F or just F,
just F, yeah, just F, right? Yeah.
So by doing that with all those selected, you can see now Luna's gone in and added a little tiny fade to my track, and this is Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, this is selectable, right, or user defined in terms of how big that fade is.
Yeah, it's in the settings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, on the one of the settings panes, you can set in milliseconds how long that fade is. Yep.
So you go hit the diamond, settings, and I believe it's here in options, right here, editing options, fade length. I believe the normal default for Focus is like 100 milliseconds, maybe.
Yeah, that's right.
Since I'm a lazy man, I put mine to 10, so it just does these really quick fades, which helps prevent any sort of pops and clicks. So good. Yep. Thanks, Drew. Good modification to the script here. So now that I've confirmed 100% unequivocally, these are all have it crossfades. I'm sure somebody is asking is like, if I do that fade, if I hit F and I already had crossfades in there, is it going to overwrite those crossfades? It leaves them alone. So you'll notice anyone's, let's say, let me undo. So I'm going to undo that crossfade, right? And there's a few other missing fades here. If I come in, make that a long crossfade, and then do, hit Command F, or sorry, just F, it overwrites it. It does exactly opposite of what I just said. So yeah, it will. Careful trying to be lazy, guys. If you go through,
it's your default fade. So yeah, if you have, if what I typically do is I'll do the default thing and then plow through them using the L and the apostrophe. L and apostrophe will go from each boundary, it'll actually toggle through. If you zoom in, Ben, and do L and apostrophe, you'll be able to toggle through each fade boundary. It'll actually go from clip edges and fade boundaries. So you
That's
can
really cool.
interrogate your fades. Yeah.
So yeah, some of you are probably, you're probably familiar with how you can use tap to go from transient to transient, right? But obviously when we're dealing with fades, like Drew said, you want to go from boundary to boundary. So this is where you want to use L and apostrophe. You can see now that my cursor is going just from one to the other throughout my session. So that's a really great tip. So L and apostrophe, those are kind of like really helpful navigation ones. The other one,
for sure.
That was the one that you mentioned earlier, right, Drew? Where you can,
along with control and option, and then L and apostrophe do markers.
So you can see now my cursor, my edit point is now following my markers here in the session. So it's a really handy navigation shortcut for you guys to remember. All right, so now everything's faded. I've saved a version of these tracks. I can hit Option Shift 3. Luna consolidates those. Command Shift K. Now I'm going to export them, and that's it. It's a very fast way. But biggest caveat, right, guys, is that this includes no automation, no effects, nothing. Like, this is just the raw audio out of your session.
Yeah.
So this is a great way for sending stuff like this if it's going to go off and be processed by somebody else. But there's, as always, there's multiple ways to accomplish the same thing. And if you wanted to export these with all of the effects processing inside of it, that's where you're going to want to come back here to the Mixdown and use the workflow that we were talking about earlier, where you come in, select a track in your Mixdown and export it that way. So yeah, that's consolidate. That's how you consolidate, guys. It's a bunch of keyboard shortcuts to remember, or two real critical shortcuts. Option Shift 3, that's the one that does the consolidating and making the audio file, and then Command Shift K for the exporting.
And generally you want to do that from 0 because Luna exports files that without a timestamp. So basically, you want every track to start at 0, even if you have to pad that beginning, just to make sure that when you put them in another DAW, you do something with them, they'll perfectly line up.
Nice, awesome. Let's see. Let me pull back up the outline. Anything else so we did capture, we did the Command Shift K. There's a Luna Basics that kind of covers some of the stuff that we've been talking about here already. So let's make sure we give that a shout out for anyone that wants a condensed version of how deep we've dove in on this here today. I think Matt's going to paste the link here in the chat, but it's Luna Basics number 7 that talks about exporting as well as everything to do with mixing down inside of Luna.
Yep, just pasted that in the chat.
Awesome. So guys, that is a ton of info about mixing and exporting. So you got a question. Do they consolidate at the sample rate of the original files or the one that we're working on at the moment? That's a great question. Matt or Drew, do you guys know for certain?
I would think it would have to be at the sample rate it's at. It would have to be, because when you change sample rates on a Luna session, the core files are left alone and the sample rate converted files are written to your workspace folder. So if you've opened and you've changed sample rates since then, upon rendering, it has to be at this current sample rate. I mean, obviously we could easily test that, but there's no other way that would make sense that it wouldn't be,
And that's another case where, you can bump up your sample rate of your session and then do the consolidate again to preserve. If you're working at 96, and I saw someone asking about this a little bit earlier in the chat too, I was wondering about they didn't like that Luna's sample rate agnostic, right? They want to be in control and know if I'm off or at the right sample rate setting. In more ways than one, the reason why they did it this way, and I totally agree with it, is you don't have to think about this too hard. And for most folks, you just want to make music. You don't want most of us don't really think that hard about our sample rates. So it's best that Luna just kind of handles that for you and makes sure that every time you're getting the audio back at the sample rate that you're supposed to be getting it at. But of course, some people are concerned about processing it, right? Especially if you're going to capture at 96, you're kind of always a little bit paranoid, am I going to still have all that information that I captured? And if we've raised a couple of points here today where that sample rate thing may matter. So you do have to be very aware if you're kind of mixing and matching sample rates, if you're trying to record at a high one, edit at a low one, and then bounce out at a high one again. You just always want to be certain of what sample rate your session is running at the moment. Make sure that the DSP works at the higher sample rate still. And then just be aware that going back and forth, when you go back to it, Luna disregards the sample rate converted files and goes back to looking at the original sample rate that you recorded the audio at. But then again, if you recorded some stuff at 96 and some stuff at 48, and then you set your session back to 96K, it's gonna upsample the 48K ones to now match the 96 ones. So
I always tell people to include sample rate in their song name. So when you create a Luna project, it's like song name dash 96K. And then like that's an easy way to remember, okay, I started this song at 96K. And then throughout the process, like you said, Ben, yeah, you might have switched you might have gone up and down for various latency or fidelity reasons, but you know that session was originally a 96K session, so that can help. So I personally think the benefits outweigh any sort of confusion, but I understand it, But once you acclimate it and embrace it, I think it's an awesome concept. I wish all DAWs did it. I mean, how many times I'm sure people in the audience have had that instance where they start tracking a session and everything's fine, but they have a clock mismatch and they didn't know it at the time. And then they give it to their friend and it's playing 6% fast or 6% slow, because of the sample rate mismatch, That's,
been there,
that's
done that plenty of times.
And it's hard to fix. It's a pain in the ass to fix, Oops.
Yeah.
Pardon my French.
Right. Well, I see everyone. People are like, where are we talking about the Neve plug? We're about to get to that. I did want to hit one question real quick from Andy, asking, can we mix a MIDI track to audio within the session easily? So Andy, the quickest way is going to be the mix down and bring back in. As far as I know, that's in theory, the trick I showed about capturing the monitor left to right. You could solo the instrument track and bounce it in that way. That's going to be fully real time. It's a little bit clunky. You can only do one at a time that way. There might be a workaround.
You can use virtuals. You can use virtuals,
right?
But they're not delay compensated. So if your Luna mixer is complex, I wouldn't recommend it.
Yeah, it's Andy. As much as I wish there was a even faster, simpler way, the mix down and drag back in is kind of the number one trick for committing MIDI instrument tracks into audio files at the moment. And then hit the feedback button. Let the devs know how much you guys all want. Freeze and commit.
Yep.
Do it for us.
Do it for all of us. All right, good. Well, so that's a ton about mixing, exporting. Hopefully we answered a bunch of you guys' questions. I know we've had a lot of people asking about these features and how to make the best out of them. See another note here, more Groover masterclasses. Yes, I totally agree. And yeah, totally agree. He's asking about the Tune Bless Up, if it's been released. It has not been released yet. Actually, I just received a version of the master for that this morning. So it's been mixed, it's been mastered. That's where it's at. So look up soon. And yes, forever, you did hear something about a Neve plugin. So let's stop dilly-dallying here and let's talk. Drew, let me pull up your screen. Let's talk about the 88RS.
Yeah, so in keeping with our series on channel strips, we've done the SSL one. We've also, but prior to that, we had done the Fairchild. So this week we're going to do the 88RS, which is it's a fantastic plugin. It's it's these channel strips. So these channel strips have a lot of switches and a lot of buttons and a lot of silk screening on the metalwork, right? So they can be a little bit daunting. And so I think we're going to do this one similar to how we did the SSL, where we just kind of walk through it. We'll do a GUI walkthrough and just talk about the controls and then just sort of round table our favorite uses for these. This is one that's near and dear to my heart because I work on the real thing pretty often and have for about the last 15 years. And so I've actually had training on this console, which is, if you see the entire thing is very intimidating. There's a lot going on there. So it's nice that we're just doing the one channel strip. So here it is, and we're going to just start in the upper left-hand corner and work our way through. And so kind of similar to the SSL, if you remember that one from last week, it has, like all consoles do, it's got a line input, it's got a mic input, and, you have the ability to switch between these two. And, I know this is one of Ben's favorite things, and actually Ben talking about it made me sort of rediscover this one, and using the mic input on sources, because this one, the SSL I've done it a lot with, and I do it pretty regularly. This one I've done it before, but it had kind of fallen out of favor. So thank you, Ben, for bringing that back up. It's the best.
It's such a good. It's a tone. It's an instant tone push, right? It's like it
really is. Yeah. And actually, I have a like this is a I have a listenable demonstration here. Let me get my cue going here so I can hear it. But yeah, so this one is really if you get some boring sounding tracks coming in, one of the best things you can do is just toggle over to the mic input setting. Now there is a big level jump. Be careful here. You have to don't do this while it's running, because what you need to do is you're going to probably need to knock down the pad and then come back up a little bit on the gain. And if you do it right, then when you toggle between these, you'll be able to really hear the differential between the line input and the mic input. And of course, you also have the ability to come down here and hit the whole bypass to bypass the plugin entirely. So there's this is like really like you can kind of have a three-way toggle here to figure out, all right, this is what my raw track sounds like. Here's what my track sounds like just through the line gain, and then adding it through the mic gain. And I'll give you a little demonstration here. I'll just use the power button to make it easier. But I have a vocal here it's a fine vocal, but it's a little bit, it's raw, right? So
you can wreck my world, rattle my bones, but I get up every time you knock me down.
So, you're kind of a typical thing. And I'm going to halfway through that line, I'm going to turn it on now. We're going to be going through the mic preamp, gain staged out a little bit with a tiny little bit of high pass. Let's see what that sounds like.
You can wreck my world, rattle my bones, but I get up every time you knock me down. Do your best to hold me back, try to break me.
So it's like, it's really like, I'm doing nothing. It's just passing through the circuitry, and it's just adding a richness to it. It's just making it feel more important. There's dynamics involved. If I were to let this play longer, you'd see that this is actually sort of saturating, compressing, and just, giving your sound a hug, super handy. I know. So
can you pull that vocal track? Can you pull the fader at the bottom up like 6 dB? It's just a little bit lower than our voices at the moment.
Absolutely. Let me do that again. So yeah, let's go ahead and do that again.
Yeah,
so we'll start with
one more time. This is guys, right now, this is barely any we'll talk about the rest of the EQ and compression that's going to come in here, but just this is the one trick, and I think we have a video of Vance Powell showing a similar thing using the 1073. This is one of the coolest things that UAD plugins offer is the fact that you can run as an insert into the mic circuit. So you're running through the mic gain stages, the transformers. It just imparts so much extra color and love to these tracks.
Yeah.
That this is like kind of having like tape having tape available to every channel in Luna. It's just kind of like that head start that it just starts developing your tone, makes the rest of the processing that much easier.
Yeah, this right here, this example right here, this is why gear matters, because not only is it functionally doing things for you, compressing, adding or subtracting stuff, but there's so much behind the scenes that it's doing you don't realize. And this is a perfect example of this, where this just running through this channel strip, this is why people use consoles. This is why they like consoles, and this is why our stuff is the closest thing to that. So I'll go ahead and play it without it, and then I'll add it in, and I'll just sort of take it on and off.
Yep.
You can wreck my world, rattle my bones, but I get up every time you knock me down. Do your best to hold me back, try to break me, shake me, but you ought to know by now I'm a fighter. I'm a climber when there ain't a way.
So it just gets, with it off, it's just a little boxy, it's a little cloudy, it's a little undefined. And when you put it on, it gets a little sheen to it. It feels like the mids get a little scooped out and a little shaped out of there. And it just kind of gets like, it just kind of gives it a hug, without doing anything. I am doing a little bit of a high pass, but that's at 80 hertz. So it's like basically nothing. So
yeah, I had a good question here from Gregory asking is if the 88RS is the same preamp as the 1073 and 1084. It is not. No. This is
a different
whole
era.
New thing. Yep.
Yeah, it's a different era. By the time this console was built, Rupert Neve was long gone. And he didn't have anything to do with this. So in the world of Neve, just to keep it super simple, there's like the old Rupert Neve stuff, and then there's the sort of more modern Neve. So this is the more hi-fi modern Neve. So it's not as colored. It's not as much about that sort of vintage vibe, but it still has color and mojo and sound, as you can hear.
Yeah, they still use transformers. It's kind of based around that, but the idea behind the 88RS was power. It was all about functionality and power. And you notice like the EQ in this, when we get to that, it's a fully parametric EQ. You didn't have those on the old school Neve consoles.
Yeah.
So just the amount of features that they are able to add. And the 88RS it's famous not just for music, but also for post and for for the cleaner side of life, if you will.
Yeah, orchestral music and stuff. Yeah, for sure.
So that's the line and mic gain, and of course, guys, everything we're showing you here, this also works in the unison slot. So you can always use this on the way in. And I know some people are kind of noting how much DSP this plugin uses. It's a great reason why it's awesome to do this on the way in. So whether or not you do a ton of filtering or EQ or compression on the way in, imparting this color from the get-go that we just showed you guys, that means that later on you've already got this color added to it, and you can process with just EQ or just compression after the fact, and not necessarily have to double up on all this color because you've already captured it from the unison side.
And even on line inputs, a lot of people don't know that unison works on line inputs. There's not an impedance matching because there's not that mic to mic preamp interaction, but on the gain staging, unison takes care of the gain staging, and this coloration that we're hearing can also happen even with line inputs. So if you're tracking synths, put these in the unison slots, come into the TRS or the D sub line inputs, and you'll still get it's as if you're plugging into that console. So.
Nice. So it goes from the basically the gain stage section flows. You guys are gonna notice these all make sense. They all kind of flow, and then they read left to right. It's kind of like a book, except it goes down and then over. So it goes from the gain into the filters. So how do these filters work?
Yeah, so these guys, just like the real hardware, in order to save space, when you design a console like this, you want to try and you want to have as much multi-functionality as possible. So rather than have on-off switches, the actual switch, becomes the on-off. So in the plugin version, we kind of labeled that we gave you that little pull and the red light and that to click on. So there's how you turn it on and off. So you can toggle it on and off by clicking that. And you've got your low pass over here and your high pass here. I have the high pass here at 80, which for a vocal is super safe. You could even probably come up higher than that for a vocal. But yeah, these are first in the signal path and or right after the mic preamp, and they're really nice. One thing is also kind of interesting about these, if you ever put these on a scope or something, you might find that the frequencies that are showing here aren't exactly the same as the frequencies there. And, the hardware does that, right?
We talked about this briefly, I think, last week on the SSL one too, right? Just because it says 200 doesn't mean it's actually 200, because that's not how the hardware worked. Like,
and you know what? Who cares? Just use your ears, turn the knob,
Use your ears, turn the knobs.
Yep.
Just go. And a lot of times, a good tip for filtering stuff, especially, or this applies to me just broadly for EQ, is go a little too far and then back it up till you get back what you want, right? So especially for low pass filtering, for high pass filtering, think about why you're doing it, right? So you're trying to maybe cut out any hum, any sort of like mic rattle. You're trying to cut out low frequencies that don't belong there. It could be a very boomy voice. All these sorts of things. Know what you're trying to cut before you go cutting, and then find the area where it's really prevalent, and then go past it. Make it too much, too exaggerate. Oh, it's completely gone, but now it sounds super thin. All right, bring it back until it doesn't sound thin anymore, but you've eliminated the rumble, you've eliminated the low end info that you don't want. And so again, the cool thing about these is you're not looking at FFT, you're not seeing the results of this happen on a scope. You're just sitting there listening until you get the musical result that you want.
Yeah, that's a great tip to do that on both. We also have on our YouTube channel, we have some F-Read shipping tips and that involve these filters. So it's a really cool thing to when you're high passing. If you high pass up to 80 or 100, then you can put back in somewhere around that point. And in his tip, he talks about with acoustic guitar, and you can. Where you take out some top end and then put it back in with the EQ. And there's just something about that interaction between the filtering and then a shelf or a peaking type filter that gives you it just sort of reshapes the top end and gets rid of the artificial stuff and pulls in the musicality of it, which is always really great with the way these filters interact with things.
That tip was an eye opener. There was another video I did a couple of years ago with another engineer that also opened my mind. I so rarely use those low pass filters on track. Like, I guess in my mind, you're always thinking, oh man, I want more air. I want more openness. I gotta leave the top end in there. If I've got top end, leave it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you don't always have to. Like, that's
No.
a really cool thing is like sometimes it actually, it sounds smoother. And this is such a gentle filter, guys. Like, this isn't like a brick wall, right? This isn't just like, everything, you know, above 18K is eliminated. No.
They're
This
12.
is like
They're 12 dB per octave, so they're very gentle.
very gentle, and that's why like it's, you know, again with the high pass filter, like it's gentle. It's not gonna perfectly eliminate everything from 80 and below. It's just gonna kind of roll off that bottom and make it less important to the signal. And same thing for the top end. So if you haven't seen the F-Free shipping video, you know, as soon as we're done here today, go check that one out. It's on our YouTube channel. It's a really cool trick.
That's a good point in general, Ben, is if when you study this vintage gear and the analog gear, you'll find that they're even from an EQ standpoint, this EQ is big and broad. Even when it's in high Q mode, it's not like crazy high. Nowadays, I see people with these fancy digital EQs and they've got 32 bands going with super narrow notches, and it's like that no one ever does that in, you know, with when you're dealing with gear. Like consoles can't do that. So it's like I feel like sometimes we're over EQing things, whereas when you're dealing with something like this tells you. The SSL channel is the same way. What do you need to make a record? This. What do you need to mix a record? This. It's like you don't need, you know, 20 bands with super narrow notches. It's anyway. So, but yeah. So it's very gentle, very musical, and those filters come next, and they're always a good thing to do next. And then from there we get down to down here. This bottom left hand area here is our dynamics area. And, you know, Neve has chosen to name these a little bit, or at least switch the order a tiny little bit, right? You know, we're so used to compressor / limiter. They've chosen for whatever reason, to, you know, use limiter / compressor. But, and the other thing that's weird, that's a little bit interesting about this is that this is the on off knob, and the knobs for it travel below it all the way to the bottom. And then on the left-hand side, we have gate / expander, and the knobs for it flow downward in a left-hand column. So it's these guys don't really have any relationship to each other left to right. They're two columns that are you know, stacked next to each other. So that's the first thing that you want to understand, is that these all go together and that they all go together. If we start over here, we've got the expander gate, and of course you want to put it into circuit. You'll notice that as soon as you put it into circuit, you have the option of turning this link button on. I happen to be in a stereo track, and so therefore what this does is links the detection circuit. I think we talked about this with the SSL, where whenever you have stereo compression, it either needs to be linked or unlinked, or in the case of something like the API 2500, you can actually selectively link the amount of left and right interaction. And essentially what it does is it ensures that your stereo image doesn't shift if there was extra compression on the left versus the right. It'll maintain that solid stereo image and make sure that both left and right side gets the amount of compression, the same amount of compression. So you can choose to link that or unlink it. It depends on how much you're doing. If you're doing very light compression, you could run it unlinked and it wouldn't be a problem. And then so from here we have it's a gate expander. When this is a knob that I think a lot of people are curious about and nervous about. It basically has it's HYST. It stands for hysteresis, and essentially what this is it's a differential applied to the threshold, which is this control right here, but only applying to rising signals. So essentially, it only applies when you're in gate mode. So in other words, you have to have this control in something other than in the expansion mode. So when I turn it all the way to the right, we're in expansion mode. The moment I come off of that, we're in gate mode, and we're either in gate mode with zero hysteresis, or a differential in that threshold, or all the way up to 25 dB. And essentially what that means is that this threshold control will determine how quickly the gate will close, and the hysteresis determines how much that threshold will be increased for rising signals. The net result is that it keeps the gate from chattering. In other words, opening falsely on signals that are trying to break through that threshold, while simultaneously allowing the falling signals or the decay to be cut off as you would like it to be. So it's kind of like a different threshold for the rising signals versus the falling signals. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, that's the best way to explain it. So you're using your threshold. The threshold is as you'd expect a gate threshold to work, right? Once you get to here, open up the gate. All right, so that's the easiest one. That's the easy one to understand. Hysteresis is now on the, correct me if I'm wrong here, Drew, but it's on the falling side of that, right? So basically, it's saying that cool, activate here, but you know what? Wait to close until we are this far away from that threshold.
No, actually, it's the opposite. It's this is the this is the falling signal, and the hysteresis applies a differential for the rising signal. So, for example, at a hysteresis of 0, hysteresis at 10 and threshold at 0, then the falling signals will get cut off appropriately, but the rising signals, your transients, have to be 10 dB higher than the threshold in order to trigger the opening. So you can imagine a snare. The gate needs to open quickly on the transient, and that's going to be higher than the falling signal. So it creates that differential. It allows the transient to come through because the threshold's higher, but while not cutting off the decay of the ring of the snare. Something like that.
So this is the graph. This is the graph from the manual I just pulled up.
Cool.
For everyone who's visually inclined like myself, here's your threshold. You reach the threshold. Open up the gate. And then the hysteresis is the difference between those two. So that it basically makes it so you have a wider range where it stays open, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
And then now,
so
the range,
the decay. Yeah, the decay of your snare doesn't get cut off, and simultaneously the transient of the snare doesn't falsely open the gate.
Yeah. This is guys. If you're at home and you're confused, I am still here too. This is another one of those ones where you're gonna like listening to it and putting it into practice. You start to really understand what it is. And again, you got to have a bit of a goal in mind, right? I've got a snare drum. I want to cut out all of the kick drum information from that snare drum. This is where, again, so Drew, like, what would you recommend to folks, like, if you're trying to set up a gate on a snare drum track to be able to eliminate all the stuff in between with as little false positives as possible, would you start with your hysteresis at, like, 0? And
I would start it at like 5 or 10. I mean, think about it this way. The easiest way to think about hysteresis is that it essentially sets a different threshold for the transient than it does for the decay. So if you think of a snare drum, and you have a hysteresis of 10 dB, then that means the transient will poke through and open the gate, and yet you can still have the threshold low enough so that it will allow the other gate to come through.
Gotcha. Yeah, that makes sense. So then you got threshold control range, similar to SSL, right? This is the amount of gating. So how far is it going to pull that signal down? So if you leave it 60, you're getting extreme. It's just like, you know what, almost silence between the two. So we talked about this with the SSL one. Like, sometimes that's useful, sometimes that's what you want, but oftentimes what ends up sounding more musical and more pleasant is slightly reducing the range. Like going for like, even 10 dB can often be
it doesn't take
enough.
Much.
It can be enough to get rid of a lot of that signal without fully going silence, because you get much more of an on-off sort of. You hear the like, oh shit, where'd the cymbals go? You don't want the tone of your other instruments around that microphone to necessarily change. Yeah.
By the way, just to finish the hysteresis thing, when you go to expansion, right? If you don't want the moment you take the hysteresis knob and get it into the expansion slot, then you're now doing you're doing expansion that has a subtle slope to it anyway, and therefore hysteresis is not a part of that equation. Then it's just it's an expander. And the threshold has a couple of different ranges you can pull to expand the range of the threshold. And with the range button, you also have a pull for fast attack on the gate side.
Nice.
And then the release, which is, you got your release control here that's variable between 10 milliseconds. Be careful on releases with fast releases on things with a lot of low end. They can get a little
kind of
funky.
choke it up.
Even on the analog side. I mean, even on the actual console, you have to be careful about the release of both the compressor and the gate, because on low frequency information, because you can get little crackles and stuff.
Nice. And then that sidechain EQ button, what does that do?
Yeah, so what this does, you'll notice right now it's not working, and that's because the EQ is not in circuit. The moment I put the EQ in circuit, then this will start to work. And this is just like the SSL, and I noticed a couple people, this was news to them. And so this is unlike the SSL EQ. This puts the entire EQ into the sidechain. The SSL, you can choose between the filters or the EQ. It's this whole side. And what it does is it takes the EQ out of the circuit. So if you push this button, then any of the EQ changes that you're making here on the right-hand side are not impacting the audio that you hear. They are instead impacting the audio that both the expander, gate, and limiter compressor are seeing. So these allow you to these allow you to turn the dynamics processors into de-essers. If you were to filter out all the bottom end and make that EQ really hone in on the sibilance, or let's say you took your high mid range and you found the sibilant frequency and you put it into the side chain, you could then turn this into a de-esser.
Yeah, this is one of those tricks. This is one of those tricks that it was incredibly necessary back in the day when you may not have like a dedicated de-esser or multi-band dynamics at your fingertips. These days, a lot of people are like, cool, like why, dude? I'm going to use precision de-esser. I'm going to pull up this Oxford suppressor. Like, there's a lot of options available to these days to do these dynamic, these kind of tone-based compressions, but again, this is staying true to how the old console, how the actual console
in the old
worked.
days. Yeah, in the old days, you'd have a 72 channel console and you had 40 tracks, so you had all these other channels. You could use another module over for your vocal as like an insert on your vocal and go out to there, do some de-essing and come back and or double up channels or mult your drums. Like people wonder a lot of times, why do I need a 96 channel console? Well, your drums, you might want to have the drums show up twice on an analog console and use mutes. Use mutes to change from the verse to the chorus, because in the days of analog, muting from these 12 channels to these 12 channels, you could do that and wind up changing a bunch of things all at once. But nowadays, of course, we can.
It's all these tricks that these days are just duplicate the track and now you have the chorus room sound. Like
we're so spoiled. Yeah,
we're incredibly spoiled. But the cool thing is that all the tones and the options of these are all preserved. You may not find yourself, you may not find using that sidechain EQ that often, but it's good to know that it's there and how it connects the two. So now the other side of the dynamics section, this is the limiter compressor. So what are all the options here?
Yeah, you have this is great. We have the basics here, where we have the the makeup gain, which starts at 0 and goes it has as much as 30 dB of makeup gain. We have that threshold, which has two different ranges, again, similar to the threshold over here. And then now we have the ratio, which of course is from 1 to 1 up through to limiting, and then also our pull for fast attack. Similar to how we've done that. Again, you're looking for adding functionality in as small a footprint as you possibly can. The release is interesting. You have your 10 milliseconds, which we'd mentioned already, same as the gate that you have to be careful of. If you go all the way over to the right-hand side and if you click on the auto, it'll go, or if you go past all the way to the end, you'll go to auto. And that is, like all auto release, where it actually tracks the envelope of the signal itself and basically automatically rides the gain so that you can get sort of a customizable release there.
Nice. And then the pull HN one there on the gain, that's the knee. So that's typically it's a soft knee, but if you want a hard knee, which is how it rounds, from where the threshold point is and above, do you want that to be kind of gentle, or do you want it to be a hard and fast kind of area? These guys are so efficient. I can't believe how many options they put into these.
And a lot of it, so a lot of it would, you can only imagine trying to design this and fit it all into these little spots.
It's insane.
Must have been amazing. Yeah.
So, similar, we talked a little bit last week during the SSL one of like where to start for these, right? So like for me, when it comes to the compressor on this, I love starting with the short release, starting with a low ratio, and then using that threshold to really, start hearing and seeing the results that I want from it, and then ultimately compensating with a little bit of gain, and then maybe adjusting the release if it's not until it feels really good. One of the key advantages, you guys probably saw this when Drew was playing that first example, is the metering. We're comparing and contrasting. I love me the SSL channel, but as we pointed out last week, SSL only shows you once you've done 3 dB of damage. I mean compression to the to your track. Whereas the 88RS, it's you'll see even 1. It'll start getting a little bit of that red on your limiter compressor meter. So the metering in this one's a little bit more precise. It kind of shows you as soon as you're starting to touch the compressor limiter, you'll start seeing some action there on the meters, which again can be really helpful. I think you've got it on this.
You can wreck my world, rattle my bones, but I get up every time you knock me down. Do your best to hold me back, try to break me.
So you're getting very, very fast and instantaneous feedback there, which is nice.
Drew, I may have had you raise your channel fader too far.
Oh, okay.
That's a little bit
crispy
clipped.
to me.
All right,
Yep.
I'll come down there and
There.
see how that's better.
You can wreck my world, rattle
we are.
my bones, but I get up every time.
Yeah, so it's really very this is a more precise and you feel like you have a lot of control here, which is nice. And actually, I think I'll move the fader down because otherwise I can't do a good A/B. But anyway,
We had
All right.
a good question here from that's relevant from No asking about is DSP management on plugins similar from plugin to plugin as far as engaging items in the circuit? So like if you don't engage the EQ, does it use less DSP, no compression, less DSP?
yeah, it depends on your DSP load lock, right? Matt probably
Right,
knows more
yeah.
about this.
Yeah, so by default, DSP load lock is turned on, which means when you load this plugin, it's going to use the full amount of DSP that it could possibly use. So even if the EQ section is disabled or the compression section is disabled, it'll still use that, reserve that amount of DSP. But if you actually turn DSP load lock off, which is not the default setting, the plugin will load with minimal DSP usage, so a little bit lower. And then as you enable the EQ, it'll jump up to use more DSP, and you enable the compression, it'll jump up again. So it really depends on how much DSP you have available and how you want to work. The danger to having DSP load lock off is if you're like really using 99% of your DSP or something, you may get into a situation where you have the plugin loaded and go to enable the EQ and you don't have enough DSP to do that. So that's kind
Right.
of why DSP load lock is on by default. But yeah, personally, I leave it off because I got plenty of DSP here, but it just depends on your system configuration.
And yeah,
Cool.
real quick, I'll share my screen. I believe Tommy's asking how do you turn that on and off. So here, right. So this is outside of Luna. So this is in the UAD meter. So you're gonna come over here to configuration, and this is the option right here, DSP load lock. So yeah, if you've got a larger system, tons of DSP to hang. It doesn't hurt to have it on if you're on a lower DSP system, you want to be more efficient about it. If you're not always using all the options inside of your plugins, turning that off will save some DSP if you're not using certain features inside of each plugin.
Yeah, and that is global. No, it's a global setting for your entire system. That toggle.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah, and if you turn it off while Luna's open, it won't have any effect. You actually have to close Luna and reopen for it to take effect.
Nice. All right, back on task.
All right, cool. So let's go back. So now I think we're done on the left-hand side. Let's go over here. Let's do the right column, and then we'll be in the home stretch here.
Hell yeah.
So I'll starting at the top. As you would expect, you have to put the EQ in circuit. Filters are completely separate from the EQ in this case. And in fact, the dynamics, the next button here is pre-dynamics. And this takes these EQs and puts them in front of the dynamics with the filters. In other words, the filters are always in front of the dynamics. And this button just toggles whether these guys go over there with them or after that. So you have some signal flow choices there. So I personally, in the case of the SSL, I like to run the entire EQ pre-dynamics. This one I tend to do a little bit after for whatever reason. But anyway, so yeah, you can toggle that. And then the EQ, it's important to understand the arrangement of these knobs because they're kind of grouped in a way that might not be visually that intuitive. So for example, these first two light blue knobs and the two switches under them, they all go together. So these four controls go together, and then below that you have three darker blue knobs, and those three go together, forming a triangle. And then you have, again, in the bottom half, it's a mirror of the top half. You have three knobs of this low mid band that are grouped together, and then two knobs, two switches. And the idea here is that by default, this top band is a peaking type filter, right? Which means it's kind of that bell shape, right? As opposed to the shelving filter, which raises or lowers all of the frequencies above it. So in other words, in its default mode, it's going to be a little bit more specific around whatever frequency you had. So if I set this to 8K and I boost it, it's going to boost, whatever amount of dB in and around 8K. I do have the option of doing high Q, which is it's basically like 2Q settings. Yeah, it makes it a little bit narrower. But as we mentioned earlier, Ben, even these guys, even in their high Q settings, by modern standards, it's still relatively broad. And then, of course, you have this button here changes it from a peaking type filter to a shelving filter. That's what that little monkey wrench stands for. Shows you that it can either boost or cut and when you put them together, that's creates that little icon. So you have a lot of shape, a lot of flexibility here in shaping. One of the things that, to go back to the technique here, if you put your filter in here and knock it down to 9K, and then come over here and you boost 8K with a peaking type filter, that creates essentially what creates a resonant low pass filter. So you're shaving off some of the sparkly top end that might not be so musical, and reinforcing it with some of that where the meat of something is, where the good presence would be. So you got a lot of functionality there.
Yes.
And then, your high mid band, you're going from 0.8 or 800 to 9K, and that has a plus or minus, and then it has its own dedicated continuously variable Q, so you can go narrow to the right or broader to the left. And the low mid band is exactly the same way. The other thing, this is one of those other things I like about these kinds of EQs, is that the frequencies, you don't have carte blanche. The low mid band goes 120 to 2K, and the high one is 800 to 9K. So it's like the designer of this EQ kind of helped steer you to where you probably ought to be, or where you need to be. It just makes life a little bit easier.
Well, and the nice thing about this too, I love the fully variable Q, the fully variable frequency. So we talked about this a little bit in the SSL. It's if you're spoiled like us and you have access to all these different channel strips, how do you pick one over the other? And a lot of times it comes down to they have a sonic footprint, right? So what we showed you earlier of the mic input on this one sounds different than the mic input on the SSL did. So they have a bit of a tonal footprint, so that's one consideration. And then it comes down to these functional things of do I need to get a really high Q? Do I want to have a fully adjustable Q with fully adjustable frequencies and have some of that? You start kind of thinking in terms of what it is that you want to accomplish, and then finding the right tool to do that. And in this case, the Neve 88RS offers some unique things that you don't get on a 1073, that you don't get on a SSL, and vice versa. So this is as an engineer, this is where you got to build up your data bank in your brain of what each of these has to offer, and when is it appropriate to pick one over the other. Comes down to a lot of experience, and then studying them. We're going in depth on this sort of stuff because it's so important to know these nuances that are available from each one of them, to know in the right situation, man, I got to fix it. There's a thing with the snare I don't like. How am I going to fix it? Oh, the 88RS has got it has the gate expander with the hysteresis. So that's I'm going to go here for the gate and then stay for the EQ, or so, or vice versa. It really does end up mattering, as much as we all want to say gear doesn't matter. The gear choice, I echo you, Drew, gear does actually kind of matter, because you have different capabilities provided to you by different ones. And then the cool thing about all these UAD plugins is that they carry tone and character along with them. So you're getting to add a little touch of analog, a little bit of that Neve sound to your mixes by coming through something like this.
Yeah, I love to say, the gear doesn't matter until it does. Because the gear, it doesn't matter until it does, which is true. At a certain level, and that's what I love about these deep dives is that hopefully we're giving people lots of things to go tinker with and find when it matters to them, right? Because the reality is that depending on where you are in your journey, you might be fine with the stock EQ for now and you're having fun with that, and that's where it's. But at some point you'll find that that's not helping you. It's not giving you something that sonic footprint. You'll come over and you'll try something like this and you'll be like, wow, I'm EQing differently with this because of the sonics and because of, like you just said, that it has features and it points you in a way, which is really cool. So that's, the bottom end EQ is the same as the top. So it's super, it's either a peaking type filter with high, medium or narrow Q, and or it can be toggled into shelving mode.
And don't be afraid to use high Q with a bit of a boost down there on the low end stuff, because that can, especially for a kick drum that needs it's missing its thump, it's missing that kind of punch in the real low, this will do it. Throwing the high Q and that anywhere from 50 to 80, upwards to 100, it can add a nice sharp kind of extra thump that's already captured in there. And we've talked about the Little Labs Vogue for doing stuff like that before, which is great because it kind of it supplements and adds a bunch of that in. If you've already got it captured with a decent microphone, a little high Q bell boost to the low end can do wonders. Ooh, that's
Yep,
tongue twister.
absolutely. Yeah, yeah, it was. I thought we went into a poetry podcast for a second. But yeah, so that's great. You're basically what you're doing when you do that. When you do what Ben is talking about and what the F-Read shipping video is, you're basically creating resonant filters. So you're lopping off the subsonic junk and the infrasonic stuff that you don't want, and you're bracketing your sound, and you're reinforcing the fundamental. You know what Ben was just saying was find the fundamental, reduce below it, and then boost on it, and like. All of a sudden, that bottom end will get reshaped into its power band, and you'll not have your mix needlessly trying to reproduce 25 hertz, right?
Yep.
Which is just robbing power from your mix, and you're focusing the power onto the fundamental. So that's super smart way to work.
I'll be the first to admit I use shelves probably more than I should. Where a lot of times you think, oh, low shelf, great, everything from 80 on down, let's have a party. Sometimes what's better is to unshelf it, leave it in the belt, so that way the kick has its area and a bass can kind of have some more space. Like, just don't, if you guys take anything away, man, don't, even though you may have a habit of like, I always think I like this, always, especially with something like this, it's so easy to click it on and off and then use your ears to judge. Do I like it as a shelf? Do I like it as a bell? Oh,
well, you know what's interesting, Ben? What's interesting is you actually, when used with the filter, the shelf becomes a third flavor, because you now have the shelf cutting off the subsonics. You now have peaking type without a wide peaking type, a narrow one, and then the shelf becomes actually, when you switch to shelf mode, becomes an even broader version of the peaking type. So you really kind of get three different flavors of low frequency boost. So you might be smart in doing that in some cases, because the shelf is the shelf, but the filter's counteracting it, so you're creating a different shape there. So anyway, it might still be smart.
Endless hours of entertainment can be had just playing around with the low end shaping of these. Before we go to the last column here, I did want to highlight the bottom of this middle column. There's a big red button. So this is something that's common throughout all UAD plugins, and you may notice this in some videos and not in others, but there's a difference between the on-off switch inside the plugin and the power on-off for the plugin broadly. So when you do it up there, as I remember, Luna's it's cutting it out. It's changing its delay compensation. It's changing everything to say this is now inactivated. And this applies to Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton as well. Like that, this will it's kind of like, what do we call it? A hard bypass in a way. Whereas the one inside it is a soft bypass, where the plugin is still instantiated, the latency, nothing changes there. And the practical purpose of this is if you guys are doing A/B examples to yourself, one of them will sometimes make a bit of a click, a little bit of a on-off, and a bit of an adjustment. The one inside the plugin will always be a nice, gentle on-off without an added click to it.
Yeah, and you definitely don't. And that, by the way, speaking of Luna, don't automate the power button because you don't want that change to happen during the song. So if you automate this, right, if you need to bypass a plugin, don't automate the power button, which I believe is an option, but don't do it.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a good point though, Ben. So. All right, so let's finish out this third column over here on the right-hand side. You'll notice that this one has an output fader and it has an output control. This is something you might have been wondering about when it comes to channel strips, and when it comes to, you'll notice some have them, some don't. For example, the API Vision doesn't have an output fader, just has an output knob. Helios doesn't have this extra knob, but yet this one does, 1073, 1084 do. And the distinction there is it depends on where on the original equipment the output amplifier was. And if it was post fader, then we modeled it, and therefore we had to put this digital trim because this now drives into the output control, the output amplifier. But a lot of them, like the Helios or the API, the op amp or the operational amplifier or whatever the output amplifier was before the fader. So this one has it. So you can drive into this and then pull down, the final output. This is pure digital clean gain. This is part of the model. So just the last little distinction here, along with what Ben mentioned earlier, the excellent and very responsive, LED bar graphs that are part of the main output, as well as the dynamic sections that show you that. So
nice. So guys, I haven't seen any major questions come up here. A lot of people just enjoying the knowledge and getting some eye openers going on here. A lot of people, obviously when you're using these channel strips, especially these versions of the channel strips, you're gonna know they do use a fair amount of DSP. There's a lot of processing going on here. There's a lot of analog modeling. But I want to show you guys a little trick. There is an option. You guys have options here. When you own the 88RS, you also get its little brother, the Legacy 88RS. So you guys will notice they look fairly similar, right? You're going to notice a lot of the same controls, but there's a few things missing. Notably, like the gain, the input section is different. Some of the metering is different. You don't have the output fader. So you guys may, and this is kind of a broad, typical thing there's a fair amount of UAD plugins where you'll notice there's a legacy version and a non-legacy version, and often the question is like, what's the difference? I notice one uses a lot less DSP than the other. So these are older models essentially that don't have all the non-linearities baked into them, right? So the transformer, all the coloration of that mic circuit, that's not going to be present here in the legacy version. You're still getting the same functionality. So a great way to think about it, so you get most of the sound, you get all the functionality that you would get on this one over here. It just doesn't have all of the same character associated with it. And then otherwise, functionally, you guys can see they're very, very similar. The graphics are a little bit older. They're a little bit fuzzier than the new one. But if you guys are looking to, if this is a functional thing for you guys, like if you're ever running out of DSP and you just need a quick little compressor and EQ, and you're not necessarily need something that has like the full Neve flavor or color to it, never be afraid to pull up the 88RS Legacy. And same goes for the SSL channel that we showed last week. And a lot of these channel strips, you'll notice there's a legacy version available that significantly reduces the amount of DSP that you need, with just a little bit of a difference in the sound of them.
Yeah, so like you put the good the Mark II on your lead vocal, and your background vocals you could get away with the legacy stuff like that, and that coloration stuff that we demoed at the beginning of this segment where it made that vocal just that's the difference. If you're ever wondering about what's the difference between a legacy and a Mark II, that's it right there. That end-to-end coloration modeling, which for me is personally it's a must-have. So if you're on the fence about upgrading, you just it's a no-brainer. But it's just a matter of usage,
Totally, yeah. So that's great. That's use the non-legacy versions for the stuff that really matters to you. Feel free to throw the legacy on the guitar doubles or the background vocals or stuff that you may not really notice the impact of that color quite as much. Great. Yeah. Well, guys, this has been nice long session here. We covered lots of ground, Mixdowns, exports, Neve, lots of great questions along the way. And anything else any other questions that we skipped over, or anything that we missed from the chat?
I think we covered most of everything.
Awesome. Yeah. Successful Monday morning. So it's fun to wake up and hang out with you guys. Matt and Drew, always a pleasure hanging out and geeking out with you guys and walking people through all these cool things that you can do with Luna and UAD stuff. And most importantly, you guys in the audience, everybody out there watching and chatting with us, you guys, as always, have got a great source of inspiration and questions for us. So it's always fun hanging out and seeing so many familiar names and faces in there. I'll say it again, if you guys have got music that you want us to feature in the countdown, hit us up live@uaudio.com. If you've got photos, hashtag Universal Audio. There's a desktop vocal promo going on right now where you can get a bunch of great plugins along with your Apollo Twin or Apollo Solo. And there's also I believe it's custom shop sale right now. It's a great deal. You can kind of put together your own custom bundles, save a ton of money on UAD plugins. So if you're enjoying some of this stuff or want to try them out, never forget you get 14-day free trials for all this stuff. We always recommend trying it out, making sure that it's something that fits your aesthetic and your needs in your mix before having to commit to a full purchase. And I guess with that, guys, we'll be back here next week with another great show. have an awesome week. Go out
Oh, yeah.
there.
And anybody, any follow, and just Ben, just to be real quick, if anybody has any follow up questions about anything we discussed today that you didn't get a question answered in the chat, feel free to head over to the forum, which is uadforum.com. And yeah, you can post a question there, and we can add some follow ups to anything and make sure that if we did something too fast for you, I can get you extra detailed information there. So
yeah, you'll always find Drew lurking on there every single day, guys.
That's right. That's right.
So everybody have a great week. Go out, make some music, and we'll see you guys back here next Monday. Later.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.